special Monday morning Teach for America North Carolina virtual summer teacher training webinar or Zoom. If you're like me today, you had to move something to be here. And for me, that meant moving my kids from one room to another room where they can continue their fourth grade and kindergarten learning. It meant making sure my wife was in another room to do. Our house isn't that big, honestly. But all joking aside, I'm so excited for this morning and just grateful for what it took for you to be here and to join us on behalf of our teams at Teach for America Charlotte Piedmont Triad and Teach for America Eastern North Carolina. Just want to give you a hearty welcome on this Monday morning. I am Andrew Lakis. I think there might be a slide here with a very old headshot. Casey, you can move us over. That was me a long time ago, pre-COVID. My hair has changed and I'm not wearing my glasses. But all joking aside, I've been the executive director of our Teach for America Eastern North Carolina region the last 5 years. I'm a proud North Carolina native. I grew up proud product of our public schools. And after graduating from Duke in 2004, I joined Teach for America as a fifth grade teacher and found my passion. And every day since, I've worked really hard to ensure that our students across the country, but particularly here in North Carolina, have access to an excellent education. And that's the story of our virtual summer teacher training. We'll get into the technical components. I've got some incredible guests with me today that I know we're all excited to learn from. But at the end of the day, it's this vision that drives us, that one day all children in our nation will have the opportunity to attain an excellent education. That's what drove us this spring when we said, how in the world are we going to get more of these incredible, diverse corps members and teachers with us to join the work that's already happening with our alumni, corps members, and partners throughout North Carolina. And that is what fueled us as we made this big pivot that allowed for that to happen. And so we'll get into that and share more, but really excited for you to be here with us, learning opportunity. And Casey, will you go to the next slide for me? So I wanted to just start quickly with just a grounding of Teach for America. If you're on this call, you probably know of us, you've supported us, you're with us in one way or another. But what some folks don't know is that Teach for America is celebrating its 30th year this year. And all 30 of those years have Teach for America has had a footprint here in North Carolina. In 1990, when Teach for America started, one of the original 6 sites was in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, where we just moved our Eastern North Carolina office back to a year ago. We're so thrilled for that. But folks also don't always know the scope of our leadership force. Today, we have corps members, which what we call our first and second year teachers, and alumni, which is anyone who's completed our program, living and working in over 2/3 of the counties in our state. 1,700 of those are alumni, working towards equity in all systems across North Carolina touch education. 995 of those are in Eastern North Carolina, 721 are in the Charlotte Piedmont Triad. And we also have nearly 300 first and second year teachers who are showing up every single day virtually in hybrid models, some in school classrooms, to make sure that our students have access to education. And so, we ground here because we want to just take a moment to just understand the in awe and the full diversity and power of our network. As we've seen over the last 9 months, nothing is certain, nothing works the way it used to work. And in many instances, these leaders, alongside so many others in our state, have figured out each day how to show up and make a meaningful impact on the lives of students. And so with that, I want to just move over and talk a little bit more about the diversity of our corps. Who are these 2,000 people? So over the course of those 30 years, we've had 3,700 diverse leaders here with us in North Carolina. 1/3 of our corps members are first generation college students. Over 51% of our corps members identify as people of color. And in the last 5 years, we've seen a 500% increase in our alumni who are leading big, bold innovation work. And we pulled that stat this morning because, quite honestly, the pivot that Samantha and Chakia and so many of our team members and alumni led this summer was probably our boldest innovation in 30 years. To move from an in-person standard training model that we had for 30 plus years and to say, okay, this year it's going all virtual. How will we do this? And so we're proud of the impact our people have. We're really excited about the future. And we're also thrilled with our first year corps members who made this pivot along and are now in month 4 of teaching in the midst of a pandemic and making sure that they show up each day to make meaningful change for the students in Eastern North Carolina, Charlotte, Piedmont Triad, and anywhere in between. And so with that, I do want to just take a minute to say a word of welcome and gratitude for Senator Ballard, who's agreed to join us this morning, and just take a minute to frame the reality of what our state faces at this moment. In her role in the Senate, as a ranking member of the Senate, she is incredibly tapped into what challenges our communities and our students and our families and our educators face. She's been a long proponent of education equity and a supporter of Teach for America to ensure that we're out making the impact we say we want to have with students and families and communities across our state. And so, Senator Ballard, thank you so much for joining us. And I'll turn it to you just to share a little bit more about what this moment looks like for us and what we should be thinking about as a state.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew, and everyone. I really am just thrilled to kind of join you guys for a little bit this morning. I haven't had to move around any kids or spouses and into any other rooms. However, I may have the Orkin pest control guy that is supposed to schedule to stop in at some point. So that's the reality of my life as well. But I'm just tickled to be here with you guys. I'm excited to hear a little bit about what your experience has been over the last 9 months specifically. I don't have to tell you exactly what this state is facing. You guys see it and you guys experience it, and you are kind of enduring it as well alongside with the rest of us each and every day. So, I engage a lot with our families. I've actually heard a lot more from parents, I would say, this over the last 9 months. During all of the pivoting and just the awareness, I think that, one silver lining, I guess, a part of this has been on my end is just to see the amount of interaction and engagement and awareness that parents have really had to tap into with their kids' education. And so then you also kind of have an understanding of who's engaged and who's not engaged in the family, and the family unit is, just really, just as valuable role in the kids' education as well. So, I've heard a lot from parents, I've heard a lot from teachers, I've heard a lot from teachers who have been excited about just sort of the new means of, delivering instruction. I've talked to teachers who've been nervous and scared by it. Some of the those who have been in service longer. I grew up in the home of an educator. My mom taught in first grade she was in Lincoln County school system for 26 years. So, even she just retired last year, actually pre-pandemic, but, has been keeping in touch with, a lot of her teacher friends as well, and just understanding kind of the struggles and just lack of understanding in some areas of just how to pivot so quickly into delivering virtual instruction. So it's been interesting to kind of see the differences and approaches across the state with the districts and the schools themselves. And then I've heard from teachers who are just been really eager to get, back in the classroom, who maybe have been doing a hybrid model or 100% remote. It's been interesting to see a bit of some, sad to say too, but some teacher shaming. I think there's been a fear of that's been going on. So like mom shaming and teacher shaming, I've heard from a lot of areas about that. And then just really at the state level, really, really zeroing in and getting even the agencies on board and certain state boards as well, just higher ed as well as in the K-12, dialed into what resources are and where they are not, how data is collected, how data is, kind of brought, how we receive the information. Is it accurate? There's just been a lot of challenges on our end with kind of really getting, an understanding of that, as well as on a broader scale. Now, I keep in touch a lot with my superintendents in my district, but I also, because I serve as an ed chair, one of the ed co-chairs for appropriations and policy, I talked with districts all over the state too. So I try to stay engaged on that level and really kind of just, continue to strengthen my understanding as I go into long session in January of where the needs are, how can we really ensure that the dollars are getting directly down to the districts and into those areas that need it, or that know, in what areas and how they're going to spend it too. So again, I mean, like Andrew has said, I've been familiar with Teach for America for over 15 years now. I worked for President George W. Bush and Laura Bush in the White House. And so I did a lot with Laura Bush on education policy as well, and got very familiar with Teach for America during my time there. And I'm just thrilled. I mean, you guys are an incredible, core. You are just always so grounded and really have an understanding of, just a robust sort of, faith in the community that you're working in and the school and in that classroom and the students that you're serving. And I just really admire that and applaud you for your efforts there and the impact that you're willing and the sacrifices for the impact that you're willing to make. So again, I'm eager to just hear kind of what your experiences have been and what you guys have learned over the last 9 months during the pandemic. And I should be on hopefully until about noon. So I'm not sure what the end time is, but that's just kind of my schedule as well. But anyway, thanks guys.
Thank you so much, Senator Ballard. And thank you for just the kind words and your continued support of Teach for America and really your steadfast belief in the potential of all kids across North Carolina. That has been true since the day I met you, and I appreciate that. My name is Crystal Roundtree, and I am the Executive Director of Teach for America's Charlotte-Piedmont Triad region here in North Carolina. And, I don't have to repeat for anyone, as everyone here knows, this school year has been unlike any other that we have seen. It's been challenging in lots of ways, and yet really hopeful in many others. And we've seen that it's presented both obstacles and really innovative solutions. Personally, similar to Andrew, I have morphed into a preschool teacher for my 3.5-year-old. And have to say, as a former first grade teacher myself, I do find that both equal parts exhilarating and exhausting. So right now, I'd love for you all to just sort of take a moment to take stock of one word that comes to mind for you when you think about this year. And we'll share that out using the chat feature here on Zoom. And we'll be able to come back to these words later, but I want to pause for a moment to just sort of let you all ponder and type that in. Thank you all for indulging in my request. I'm seeing some good words come up, and certainly all of them resonate with me as well. So thank you for that, and you can keep that going in the chat. But now it's really my absolute honor to introduce you all to a few of our panelists this morning who also just happen to be dear friends of mine as well. This spring, more than 54 million children were affected by school closures nationwide. And that really marked the most destructive moment in recent history for public education. The trajectory for teaching and learning in our country changed forever, which meant that here at Teach for America, we had to think differently about how we prepare educators to meet this ever-evolving system, both now in this current moment and in the future. And while much was and honestly continues to be uncertain, one thing that we at Teach for America were certain about was that our students need us now more than ever. And so on a very tight timeline, we moved quickly and nimbly to both reimagine and redesign how we train our teachers to ensure that all 2,800 of our incoming core members across the country were prepared to teach in the fall. In just the span of really a few short months, we designed an innovative and rigorous virtual summer teacher training, which we sort of affectionately call the VSTT, to prepare our new teachers while keeping health and safety at the forefront. And so today we invite some really special guests to share with us how they pivoted and what they learned about meeting the needs of students and teachers in this moment. And so today we're going to hear from Chakia Parnam, who is the Vice President of Institute and Program Implementation for Teach for America, and Samantha Hoare, who is a Teach for America alum from the Delta back in '03, same core year as me, who serves as the Executive Director of Teach for America's Miami-Dade region, and actually stepped in to lead our national teacher preparation innovation work this summer. And now I am excited to pass it over to my good friend and colleague, Sam, who's going to share a little bit more about what virtual summer teacher training is and how it was designed. Sam?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal. And I am just so happy to be here with you all today. This wasn't mentioned before, but not only am I a 2003 Delta alum, but I am a 2003 graduate of Duke University. So I have a soft spot in my heart for the Durham area, and actually was classmates with Andrew way back when we were much younger, as it turns out. So
stories. We need some good stories on Andrew.
We actually took class together. There are some really good stories to be had. In any case, I actually am really excited to not only just share what we've learned and some of the decisions that we made through the spring and summer, but actually just want to start off first by taking us back 9 months. As Senator Ballard shared, it's actually been 9 months since we've been living in this pandemic. And in many ways, I don't know about y'all, but we're sort of operating as though this is sort of normal. It's sort of normal to be operating in pandemic times. And truly, it's not. And this was really not normal this March when we were really confronted by the pandemic itself. So I want to start there at the beginning and share where we found ourselves at Teach for America in mid-March. And so, you know, to take us back then at Teach for America in mid-March, we were nearly a year into planning for our annual Summer Teacher Training Institutes, which launch in early summer. And our Summer Teacher Training Institutes are where we train our new incoming teachers in the foundations of teaching. And since Teach for America's inception, our model has been generally the same. So for the last 30 years, we have brought thousands of new teachers into the profession of teaching through a 5-week residential teacher training institute. And so what this really looks like on a day-to-day level is that our teachers live on a university campus all together, and they spend their mornings teaching in schools and in their afternoons receiving professional development and coaching from a summer staff. And so, you know, while we have shifted our curriculum and our approaches over the last 30 years at Teach for America, as we've learned more about best practices, the fact of the matter is for about 30 years, training has broadly looked the same. And, you know, we have really focused on this residential university setting, and we have focused on teaching in classrooms. And that has really been the heart of our work. And now, as you know, we faced a sort of a crisis in March. We had a completely new reality where universities across our 20 locations were actually canceling all their contracts with us, closing down their residence halls, and all of the schools in the districts that we partner with and typically, you know, run summer schools for, were closing schools. And they really just had no idea about when or if schools would reopen in the next 2 months for summer school. In addition, I really can't understate the fact that our country was facing a racial reckoning, and joblessness rates were just really compounding the strain and the complexity in our system overall. And so by and large, in mid-March, you know, about 2 months out from when we were welcoming thousands of teachers, our entire model just wasn't going to work. And to be clear, we were actually faced with the same question that teacher training programs at colleges, universities, and different programs across the country were facing. So it wasn't just Teach for America, it was truly everybody across the country. And we were grappling with a few like really key questions. So one of those questions was just in the face of school closures, where and how could we conduct a teaching practicum? Where could we really gain that proximity to students? And then another core question was around the uncertainty in our system. So first, would schools and district leaders have confidence in our ability to deliver strong teachers who would be ready for students on day one? And two, would our incoming teachers, would this group of students that had recently been admitted into Teach for America, would they continue to stay the course with us? You know, this continues to be a big question, which is, you know, is this going to be a desirable profession for them? Will they want to continue, you know, doing this work alongside of us? And so, you know, we went about very quickly determining an answer, at least to those last two questions I just named. And so First, we started, by connecting directly with school and district leaders across the 50 urban and rural cities and districts where we hire, Teach for America teachers and where we operate. And what we did was we shared very transparently and candidly our context. And they totally understood. And we shared the uncertainties about moving forward and asked just very directly, given these uncertainties, given these circumstances, would they have confidence in our Teach for America teachers? And would there even be the possibility that they'd be able to hire our teachers come fall? And I have to say the answer was a resounding yes. And, as an executive director, I made many of these calls myself. And I just remember one call from a principal where this principal just said, like, yes, please, like, more than ever, I believe that we need the commitment and leadership of your Teach for America teachers at my school. And I'm willing to do what it takes to partner with you all. And so then the next question became, we need to understand whether or not our recent college graduates who'd been accepted to Teach for America would want to move to a new city during a pandemic, whether they were worried about their own health and safety, whether their families were okay, whether they needed, to spend time someplace different. And as we met with our core members one-on-one via phone calls, via focus groups, via surveys, the answer from our incoming teachers was just resounding. More than ever, they were committed to ensuring that every single child had access to a great education, especially as they watched the impact of school closures around them, both at their own colleges and universities and in their communities. And so yes, by mid-March, by the third week in March, we knew that we had to move forward with training our group of over 3,000 teachers to enter the teaching profession. And the question became, how do we do that, given that the building blocks of our program, universities and schools, remained closed? And so I just want to name one of the most obvious and largest pivots that we made. And that was moving from having 20 different residential training sites across the country to one national training program that would be delivered virtually, so that all of our incoming teachers could shelter at home through the start of the summer. And I also want to share that though this was a huge pivot, it also presented an opportunity to accelerate several aspects of our work that we've been hoping to roll out over the course of the next few years, which included a digital-first approach to training. And it also included the idea of clarifying our onboarding model and refocusing people sort of away from just this idea of a 5-week training institute, but really towards what onboarding and pre-service at Teach for America look like over an extended period of time and well into the 2 years of teaching. And so I do want to name that, though I'm talking about this pivot right now as though it was, completely tenable, very normal, I also have to just say the circumstances were completely unheard of. We had approximately 10 weeks to plan a virtual summer teacher training institute that would support teachers in 6 time zones across 49 states, while supporting teacher certification requirements in over 25 different states. And so, at this point, our CEO, Elisa Villanueva-Beard, she knew that something of this magnitude would require an all hands on deck approach. It would need to be, sort of an entrepreneurial approach. And so she asked that I actually just step away from the day-to-day of running Teach for America in Miami and take the next 3 months to plan and execute our virtual summer teacher training program. And here is when we get into a bit of the how. So, as I stepped into this role, it was the end of March. I had just a couple days to take stock of where we were. And again, though this was unheard of, we did have tremendous assets. And so some of those assets include a significant amount of strong curriculum, a really strong approach to teacher onboarding, and we just have really excellent talent that we could access as summer training staff. So we had some real assets. And yet there were also a lot of challenges to confront, including a very short timeline, a lack of a technology and learning management system partner, a structure that had to be completely reimagined given that we typically engage students via schools, and curriculum that was not designed to be delivered virtually. And so there was a whole series of questions that needed to be answered really quickly. And in order to tackle all of these core questions, I knew that we were going to have to move away from thinking linearly, right? So we didn't have a year to prepare. We couldn't set up a whole group of teams to sort of tackle questions one by one. We had to borrow a page instead from startups and from the tech world. And so we began planning through sprints and making a series of decisions sort of side by side. And all a sprint is, if you've not heard of one or aren't familiar with this, it's just a protocol for answering a question and delivering on a product within a very specific time frame. So given our time frame, we had to be able to make decisions and sort of ship products quickly and make a series of decisions all at once that were still coherent. And so we did spend the longest amount of time, when I say a long time, I mean 7 days. That was the longest we spent on delivering a product on the first 2 sprints. And so I just want to name these first 2 sprints answered the most important questions. And those questions were, what does readiness look like in this context? What does it look like to prepare teachers when we don't know if they'll be virtual, in person, or teaching some combination of virtual and in person, so hybrid in the fall? And what are the foundational skills, mindsets, and knowledge that every single teacher need given this context? And finally, what outcomes and sort of domains of learning will lead to that readiness bar? And so once we defined those things, we could move quickly to answer a whole series of other questions and completely reimagine our work. And so I'm going to actually pass it over to Shakia, who joined our virtual summer teacher training team as the lead of one of our sprints. And she'll give some additional color to what it was like and take us through where we eventually landed and some of what we learned before we dig in with some other folks. So, Shakia.
Thanks. Yeah, I am taking myself right back to the moment in March when we were preparing to lead those sprints, and I had the opportunity to lead a sprint myself, focused around how do we ensure that in this distance learning experience that our core members feel a sense of closeness and community. And so we thought through all the events, all the gifts, all the strategies we could put in place to ensure that we were able to still leverage the strong community that we had built over the years during Institute in this new model. And so one of the things that is true about how we actually ended up designing the final product that you see in front of you is that it became clear 2 things. One, to what Sam has shared, we would need to innovate on everything from our staffing to how we engage students. And then 2, we would need to create learning spaces that felt small and supportive while we were physically distant for the very first time. And so we had to make an enormous amount of complex decisions in a finite amount of time in a context that I'm sure you all can remember was constantly shifting and very uncertain. And so to support us in navigating the complexity and uncertainty, we created a set of design principles, and they helped us weigh options and make decisions quickly on a 10-week timeline. And so the design principles were: 1, keep it simple. There was so much complexity happening and swirling around us. We wanted to make the most simple decisions possible. We also wanted quality over quantity because we knew that we wanted to really focus on the highest leverage strategies. And then we wanted it to be outcomes and research-based because there were lots of folks who had already been playing in the virtual learning field, and we wanted to learn from them. We also knew that we were among in good company, as Sam shared, with other teacher prep programs who were also trying to figure out, what do we do this summer? And so we leaned on those partners to help ground us in what they were learning, and also wanted to ensure that we were grounded in the outcomes we wanted to be true by the end of the summer. And then we wanted it to be user-centered. As Sam shared, we spent a lot of time designing in the design sprint over 2 days. And then even in my own design sprint, I had regions like call up core members and say like, would you like stickers or would that be not cool? Because I'm quite a few years removed from my core experience. And I'm just like, what resonates? What are you looking for from this moment? What would make you feel connected and galvanized? And so we use that user data to design what ended up happening this past summer. And then we also understood our teachers were teaching in a variety of contexts. Some would be in person, some would be virtual, some would be doing both. And they'd be doing that across a variety of communities. And we knew that at the end of the day, regardless of context, that our teachers needed to be equipped to lead rigorous, supportive, and inclusive classrooms. And so we had to build a readiness bar that allowed us to get crystal clear about then what they would learn to reach that readiness bar. And so we ended up drilling down to 4 learning domains: instruction, how do you ensure that students are getting really rigorous, supportive, inclusive instruction; learning environment, how are you building a classroom environment where students feel safe, brave, and included; and diversity, equity, and inclusion, how are we ensuring that as teacher leaders, we are learning about ourselves, about systems, and about others in a way that drives us to create classrooms where equity and inclusion can thrive. And then reflection, because we're going to be learning a lot. I don't think there's a single person in education, regardless of your teacher or principal, that got through this past summer and year without doing tons of reflection. And our teachers would engage in these learning cycles where they would learn a skill and plan a lesson around it. They would build in some learning environment skills in that lesson plan. They then take that lesson plan and think about it through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and then reflect at the end of the week. And so they were doing this learning in a very cyclical fashion. And the other thing that was true is that, our residential model really focused on having core members or our teachers learn a skill and then apply it with students in live student teaching. And so we had to get innovative about how we supported our teachers to still center students and families in the absence of in-person teaching. And so we partnered with a virtual small group reading company, Springboard, and our teachers taught a small group of 1 to 3 students 2 times a week. And they taught them lessons to improve their foundational reading skills. And then they met with families at the end of each week to share their students' progress. And so that allowed us to still center students, to still meet a very real need for students at that time in the summer for virtual learning, and in the midst of having to think really innovatively about it. And then we also had to innovate on staffing. To launch a change at this scale in 10 weeks, we knew we needed to rely on our most experienced talent to pull this off. And so in our residential model, we would staff with local educators that were taught for Teach for America, our alumni, who then step away from their roles as teachers, principals, operations directors at schools, and work for the summer. Well, this summer, our staff was made up of 1/3 of our full-time staff, and the remaining were our most seasoned returning staff members, some coming back for like their 15th summer for summer training. And what this allowed for is for us to have a staff that could be agile and could get started with 1 to 2 weeks of onboarding and training and excel compared to our usual 3-month training timeline. And then finally, we created really small, closed spaces and distance learning. And all learning happened in learning communities. And these communities were about 40 to 60 new teachers big. They had 5 to 7 staff members that were dedicated to that learning community. And so day in and day out, those core members saw the same people, the same staff members, and then their learning broke down even further into groups of 4 to 5, where teachers would engage in reflection, relationship building, practice, and discussions. And those groups are the groups that our core members still are excited about and still connect with and feel really, really connected to Teach for America because of the size of those groups. So yeah, that's where we landed. And so coming out of the summer, we had 2 big wonderings. Which one, will our teachers feel as connected to each other in the organization as they have in the past when they were in a dorm room all together teaching kids? And 2, will our teachers feel as prepared to become a successful teacher in this model? And so what we discovered was that we were able to create a much more consistent experience across our incoming teaching core. And so this reduced the variability and experience that we had in our previous model across the core, experiencing 20 different residential models. And then we also discovered that our teachers' feelings of connectedness were on par and in some cases slightly above our results over the past 3 years on our teacher satisfaction survey. And then our teachers believe that the preparation they received over the summer was just as, and in some cases, even more valuable in their efforts to become a successful teacher. And so we're going to get a chance to hear more directly from some folks who are working with those teachers to share more about how the outcomes that we saw at the end of the summer that we felt really proud about, we learned a lot of lessons, how that's actually playing out now that our first year teachers are closing out their first semester.
I have a couple questions before we kind of dive into that section, if you don't mind. So you mentioned that you leaned into other sort of teacher prep programs, kind of across, I guess, the country as you guys were developing your, format. Once you kind of developed your format, did other like prep programs lean into what you guys were developing at all and vice versa? Or because I tried to argue with some folks about the need to utilize more of the prep program participants, like even at our universities and higher ed institutions, for more of that one-on-one kind of summer learning experience for those kids. We know that we're going to be left behind, or that we're going to be, further behind than what they were. And that there seemed to be just not quite that, like almost a little too outside the box thinking whenever I was trying to argue and suggest it. So that's why I'm curious, because what your model is essentially was kind of one thing that I was actually kind of pitching as part of what our K-12 system here in North Carolina was calling like our Jumpstart program. But I was literally trying to go into a smaller groups, smaller settings, smaller, classroom, virtual classrooms, but with individuals who were going through the prep programs but had the necessary certification or criteria and had met all of that. That could still be utilized, just utilizing existing resources in order to kind of fill that gap. So I just didn't know if, you guys leaned into them. I didn't know if folks have been leaning into you at all either.
I would say we did lean into a variety. So I'll answer this quickly, and then we can get back to it and go more in depth. But I'd say there's two things here. One, we worked specifically with a series of universities across the country to gain some insights, and then also other non-traditional like routes to teaching, right? So to learn what was going on. What I'd say the thing that was hardest about moving into this space is twofold. One is when you're trying to do a national program across the board, it's really hard then to figure out how do you engage with students just generally, right? So a lot of what folks were having a lot of trouble with is folks are saying, yes, we want to partner with you, we want our students to have access, but then actually having consistent access to students and doing so in a way that also like maintains student privacy, that ensured that you were getting like a consistent access to students over time. It was challenging specifically because it was so soon after the pandemic had started. I think that as we look to other summers, even to this next summer, it's going to be easier because we're going to have much more systematized ways to engage students. But there was still a lot up in the air that led to it. We took a big risk actually doing what we did. And we learned a lot about what it takes to engage students and families consistently, virtually specifically.
Yep.
We can go on more.
Thank you so much, Senator Ballard and Sam and Chakia for walking us through that. I do want to pivot us just to come to our panel, and you'll see that we have Chakia and Sam with us. We also have two other guests this morning. Miriam Tisdale, who's a 2004 Teach for America Greater Delta alum and who leads our program work in the Charlotte-Piedmont Triad region, and Dr. Lauren Lampron, who was the Eastern North Carolina 2010 Corps member in Edgecombe County, is currently the principal of Southwest Edgecombe High School and the Edgecombe County Principal of the Year. Thank you all for joining us this morning. And I know we have a few questions to ask to get us started. And if we have time, we're going to open up the chat for question Q&A. So I think, I want to, Lauren, I want to start with you just because you're a practitioner in the field, leading a school in the midst of the pandemic. But I'd love to just hear kind of what you're noticing and seeing in this year of learning, what challenges there are, what excites you, and what the implications of this Teach for America model were for you this year and perhaps in the future?
Yeah, lots to talk about there. Super exciting, Andrew, and I loved hearing, the word risks that Teach for America was saying they were taking in order to make sure that we could offer equitable learning opportunities for the students and families that we serve here in rural Eastern North Carolina. I think it goes without saying that the pipeline we have of TFA is invaluable in terms of trying to attract talent to such a rural community. So I serve a little town called Pine Tops, North Carolina, where we have a Abrams barbecue and biscuit area. And that might be our claim to fame, and so like just getting people that are excited about doing the work and sharing in the meaningful work proves to be difficult. And so just knowing that Teach for America was here to come and celebrate and fill vacancies matters. And I just kind of want to pause in that moment and just lift that up, that in and of itself, the fact that we were able to hire 2 teachers to make a world of difference to our kids matter. And we've decided at Southwest to do things differently. We really wanted to confront this as a conversation about equity, that we can acknowledge that, in a rural area, in a low income area, in a high poverty area, in a high minority area, the truth is that our students of color are the ones that are the most disadvantaged in situations like this. And the like this can be talking about systemic racism and oppression. The like this can be environmental racism with the floods we've experienced and the hurricanes recently. But the like this that's in our locus of control today is that we're not going to continue to exacerbate unfinished learning due to COVID. And so we're trying to get curious about doing things differently. And that's everything from what is a grade, right? Like we have all these common grading practices that we lift up and say, this is what I experienced. This is what my mom experienced. My grandparents probably had the same traditional learning experience. And how do we do that differently? And so that's been really interesting. When we look at our scheduling, we said, if we can do this differently, what else can we do? And so we kind of hit the pause button and said, let's stop just doing traditional experiences. And that's why my word is innovative. We spent this time doing empathy interviews with the students and the families we serve to get really curious about what do our stakeholders need? What do they expect? What does it take for us to make them proud? That they go to Southwest and that we're offering equitable learning experiences for kids. And so we have this really cool Southwest success plan, which basically says that we acknowledge that we're on plan B in a sense, in that some students can be served while the majority of our students are served remotely. And so ironically enough, a first year Teach for America person came to me, Ms. Hopper, our math teacher, and said, hey, I know we're bringing in EC students, but those are not the only students, the exceptional children students that are struggling. What would it look like if I brought other kids in? And do I have to sneak them on campus or can I actually allow them in? And so we reached out to the superintendent and we said, hey, this is what one of our teachers is doing. We want to replicate this full school. And so from her idea, what we were able to do is get really curious about how to serve kids and how to bring students back on campus and how to do that safely. And I just think that there's a spirit of innovation and love coming with TFA. So while one core member is changing the building literally in terms of how we serve kids and what we're asking our teachers to do, the other is a first year who has been in front of kids the entire time because she decides she's going to fill a void and coach volleyball. That we actually have kids on campus doing volleyball. And, we're following all the guidelines from the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. But it's interesting that we have first year teachers that have said, I'm not going to play into this archetype of what it is to be first year. I'm not going to play into the fact that I'm at a new school. I'm not going to play into the fact that this is a pandemic, that they came fully ready to do meaningful work in spite of every challenge we could possibly throw at them. And so when I hear you ladies speaking about what happened this summer, I just want to affirm to you that it mattered because they came here and they showed up and they're doing real work for kids. And so I think my takeaway from this is We have looked to schools for so long to be the grounding experience that we know not all kids practice sports, not all families practice religion, but what all kids experience is education. And so I think we're in a very powerful moment that redefines education as we know it. And I think everyone on the call would agree we've waited far too long. And so I think we're really taking this as an opportunity to hit the ground running, just continue to move forward.
Thank you, Lauren, so much for such a powerful and beautiful answer and tying this all together for us. Reground us in our purpose around inequity and addressing the impacts of racial and class inequity, and also just naming what that leadership means in this moment. So powerful. Miriam, I want to come to you and building off of Lauren's answer about what she's seeing in her school building with these first-year corps members. You know, as you've led the program team in Charlotte Piedmont Triad, just curious kind of how you're seeing teachers adapt in this moment and what the key impact is that you've seen from this summer and how it's playing out in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, I had the wonderful privilege of leading one of those learning communities that Chakia was talking about this summer. And the majority of my corps members actually in my learning community were Charlotte Piedmont Triad corps members. And so we got to start the relationship very early. And I can also speak to their progress now in the classroom or virtually. I'm going to share two stories to kick off my answer. The first one is just in terms of adaptation. I think our corps members really learned that this summer. They learned how to be flexible, they learned how to adapt, and they learned how to take real responsibility and think through the actions that they can take to make things better for kids. And I think Lauren gave a great example of a first-year teacher in her building that's done that. We have a teacher in our school district who was teaching virtually early on, an elementary teacher, and then started tutoring through her classroom window before we could go back virtually. And students would actually come with their families and sit outside her window, and she would do tutoring that way until it was okay for kids to be back in the building. Another teacher, two teachers over at Hairston Middle School in Guilford County, they saw after their first assessment that only 27 of their over 200 students rather, had taken the first quarter exam. And while they were initially really stoked about the results they saw there, they also realized that it wasn't representative, obviously, of the majority of their students. And there was real work that had to be done to get kids there to make sure they had the technology. And so, John, to your question in the chat, you know, what are those rates? I think early on we saw, and it varied across our districts, you know, CMS is 1-to-1. And so we haven't had the same technology issues that we've had in other places, but it has meant that relationships have been integral. And so my word for this period of time for our teachers is relationships first, because when we saw students not showing up, the first thing our teachers did was begin calling them. Calling their families, seeing what was going on and learning what their challenges were and seeing what they could do to actually help students and families get online, see what resources they needed, they could engage in virtual learning. And as a result of that, we've seen a significant change in attendance virtually and in person, which is obviously critical to making sure that there is no learning loss this year. I would also say, like, I'm really proud of the results that I think started at virtual summer teacher training and have carried over through the school year. So as Sam was sharing, you know, we looked at this previously as a 5-week training. We now look at this as a multiple week, multiple month onboarding experience for our newest teachers. And so that meant that we were able to carry through the learning from the summer into a really strong 90-day plan in our region that included intensive coaching. This was all done virtually, obviously, because we were still virtual at that point, and it's still being done virtually. And I would actually make a bet moving forward that it will continue to be done virtually because of the success we've seen. I think it got us out of this archetype that to be a strong coach, you had to observe and then give feedback. And that was the only way we could grow teachers. We've learned in Charlotte Piedmont Triad that is not the only way to grow teachers. And we have found that some of the virtual coaching really helping understand who the person is, what their motivations are, getting really clear on goals with them, actually is making us see more progress than we've ever seen. I am a numbers person, in addition to being a stories person, which I started with stories though. And I do want to highlight some of the success our region is seeing. So we have, based on our first round of data from our over 150 teachers in Charlotte Piedmont Triad, which includes cities like Greensboro, High Point, Charlotte, some places in between, and more rural, that we have 91% of people have accepted our offers for next year already. And this is in the middle of COVID, in the middle of the questions people have about making transitions. You know, we had teachers this year in our first year cohort move from California to North Carolina in the middle of a pandemic, and we still have people saying yes. And this is above the national average of 74%. We have 90% retention of our first year teachers to date, which is higher than it's been over the last several years. We have 92% of our members saying that coaching has enabled them to stand in responsibility, which means that they are making in the moment choices to make learning more equitable, more accessible to all of our kids in CPT. 94% of our core members feel seen, known, and heard, and we've never met them in person, y'all. And so this really speaks to the power of the intensive coaching and virtual coaching we've been able to do. We've had upwards of 12 or more touch points with each one of our teachers so far this year. And so what we're talking about now is usually what we're talking about at the end of the year. And so thinking about the progress that's possible in a virtual or in-person classroom space is just stronger. We also have 89% of our teachers saying they're consistently ensuring that they're planning and executing lessons that are rigorous, grade level, and meeting students' needs. And so I shared all that data to say that we have never had results like this. And we are getting these results in the hardest of times. And I think that our virtual summer teacher training set us up to do that. And I feel like I can say that with confidence, having worked in both that space and now leading program here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Miriam, for kind of bringing us into what you're seeing in this moment and the results we've seen so far this early in the year. I think I want to pivot, and I know we're running short on time. We've had so much good information. So if you do have questions, still feel free to put them in the chat. I think we're weaving some of them in. Our panelists are very expertly weaving them into some of their answers, but we can also follow up with folks if we can't get to them before 12. But I do want to pivot to Sam and Chakia again. As you're listening to, you know, an alum school leader and a head of program talk about what they're seeing from our core members in this moment, I think two questions come up. You know, one, what lessons did we learn this summer? And as you're hearing this and thinking about the impact now, what does that mean for the future as we think about this upcoming summer, given that there's still uncertainty about whether or not students will be in person? Will we have to do some virtual again? I'm just curious, kind of from your leadership lens, what this means and what we should be taking away from this.
Yeah, I'll kick this off and then toss it to Sam. So there are a couple of things that I think lessons that we've learned. One, to Miriam's point, we learned that we actually get a lot out of our teacher preparation program when we extend the onboarding period for our core members. And so as we think about moving forward into next year, we're doing some things around naming and calling it pre-service, particularly to signal that for an incoming core member, from the moment they accept and they start digging into their pre-work, through their first 90 days, they are being developed as a teacher. What we really want to be true is that our core members at the end of their first 90 days feel hungry to learn more and to be a continuous learner and reflect, but also feel like they're building their confidence as a teacher. The second thing we took away was our staff are incredible. And we did, as a member of the virtual summer teacher training staff, we worked really hard, but I think that the results we were able to achieve with core members lies so much on the fact that we had so many experienced catalytic leaders in front of our core members. And we were able to do that because we were virtual. And so we were able to put folks across this call in front of core members that would be placed across the country and really leverage our staff. And so as we think about moving forward in our upcoming model, we want to do something similar where we're able to get our staff who have the most experience working with our core members, who are already building relationships with them, to be able to continue that into the school year so that folks like Miriam can build relationships as core members are just starting their work, and then continue those into the school year, and doing that in a way that still acknowledges that we are still in a pandemic, and that as an organization, as people, we have experienced so much change. And so we're also thinking really concretely about how we hold our staff members as we take on this new approach to the training that we feel like has gotten us so much. And then the third thing is connection. we learned so much about having our whole 2020 teaching core all together during that experience, that they are a core that is so much more connected to one another. They are sharing resources, they are communicating with one another, not just in Charlotte, Piedmont Triad or in Eastern North Carolina, but truly across the country. And so our model for this upcoming year will leverage that national community while also building really deep roots in the communities that they'll serve in over their 2 years and beyond. So those are just some things that are coming up for me. I'd love to toss it to Sam to hear more about what lessons she's taking away.
The only thing I would add, and I think those are some particularly strong ones, is what I'm hearing directly from our principals and school leaders here in Miami is that they are just blown away by the level of flexibility and adaptability our incoming teachers have, specifically as it relates to their resilience with technology and different tech tools. And so, you know, not everything went perfectly this summer with tech. I mean, we had a very short runway to determine what partners we would use there. But I think actually the experience our core members had with digging in, understanding the purpose, and then experiencing virtual learning themselves has really translated. And so just for, you know, some context, in my context, I have about 65% of my teachers teaching hybrid. So they have students in person, they're in a classroom and also teaching students virtually at the same time. I've got 15% teaching all students in person, and the rest, about 20% are teaching virtually. So we've got a wide mix, and I think that this approach really set them up to have that sort of spirit around technology and user experience for students that I don't think they would have had in a traditional experience.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam and Shakia. And I know we're right at time, but Lauren, Miriam, you closed us out with such great data. Lauren, I just wanted to come back to you to see if you have a parting thought for us, the school leader in this moment, what we should be thinking about.
Yeah, I just want to kind of affirm what Senator Ballard was saying, that I guess it's mixed company, right? In terms of like, how are we doing? How are schools responding? I think it's important to encourage everyone to, you know, fail forward and take big risks. I also think, though, the people on the call, there are things we can be doing. We can be advocating for infrastructure for all of our kids, right? We need devices and we need internet. There are very real things we could be talking about. In North Carolina, for example, we're still being held to state accountability models for testing and bringing kids on campus for end of course tests. And, you know, we talk a lot about data, and those are very real things. And so in a moment where people are working diligently for kids and doing meaningful work, I think it's important that in our sphere of influence, there are other on the ground things that we could be doing and advocating for to make sure that the advance that we're doing and the creative thinking that we're doing is further supported by our community at large. So again, just really appreciate the meaningful work we're doing. And this is so rejuvenating to hear that in all aspects of Teach for America and in all of our sectors, we're doing good work for kids. And that feels really good. So thank you for inviting me to be a part of the conversation. And I look forward to see what you guys get up your sleeves for next summer.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lauren. And as we come to our time here at the close, I just would love in this virtual world, if we drop some love in the chat for our panelists today, just deep gratitude for Lauren and Miriam and Samantha and Shakia, and for Senator Ballard for framing the moment for us earlier. And we're just deeply grateful for you all being with us. It was a big innovation. It seems to be working in many ways, but there's still a lot to learn. And I think the parting thoughts I'd just share as we close out, I think one, you heard this thread from our panelists today, but I'm a big believer in this idea that pandemics don't create new problems. They amplify ones that already existed. And I think we know why we exist and why you're here with us is because we want an education system that works for every single student in North Carolina today so that we can build a more vibrant, inclusive future tomorrow. And leadership matters. It took this Herculean effort to get our new core members here in North Carolina and across the country. And the reason we believe that that is critical is the immediate impact they can have on students today, but it's also because those leaders have the opportunity to grow into the ones you've probably been familiar with and inspired by throughout our state. In Edgecombe County, like Dr. Lampron or Donnell Cannon, or Jenny O'Meara, Aaron Swanson, or Henderson Collegiate with Eric and Chris Sanchez, or KIP Gaston with Tammy Sutton, all of those incredible leaders who are changing the game with students and families started in a classroom in 2002 or 2007 or 1996, and they grew into the leaders they are today. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we're grateful for your support. And it's why this effort this summer really, really matters now and matters to the future of our students and families in Eastern North Carolina. And so with that, I just say thank you for joining us. I know we didn't have as much time to get to questions and answers. Still free to drop them in the chat, and we will follow up and either set up more time to talk or follow up individually. But thank you for taking time out of your day to be here. Thank you for deeply believing in the unlimited potential of our students and for helping us continue to grow and get stronger and reinvent what's possible for students throughout North Carolina. Thank you, everybody. Have a great Monday.
Thanks, guys. Keep it real. Keep it real.